So the time has come to cover the one, the only, the god himself, Gaspar Yanga. So Gaspar Yanga cannot be covered in one video. It's going to have to be multiple parts so that you can truly digest the information. So the first thing you need to know about him is that he was a prince in West Africa, specifically to the Bantu people. Given his royal lineage, he was also a natural-born leader, so he inspired 23 other enslaved Africans to revolt against the Spanish and form the first Palenque, the first autonomous city in Mexico.
Hi lovelies and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, you're welcome to Building the Verse. Don't forget to please subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications so that anytime I upload a video, you will be the first person to be notified. To my returning subscribers, to those people that share my videos, leave commentaries, and also educate each and every one of us, you guys are the real MVP. Alright lovelies, let's dive into today's video.
About Gaspar Yanga, the original Mexican, but the town he founded is still recognized.
Gaspar Yanga is not the first Mexican or the original Mexican whatsoever. What he did, and we both can agree, is he founded the first town in Hispanoamerica. Yes, I said it, Hispanoamerica, not Latin America. He was the first to rebel. The first slave rebellion in Hispanoamerica was here in Mexico, yes. And yes, the town is still today in Veracruz. Go visit. He's not the first Mexican at all. He was born in Gabon, modern day Gabon, Africa. He died in Mexico, yes. But DNA, genetically speaking, he is African. He's not Mexican. The modern Mexican DNA is mestizo, which is a mix, usually between indigenous and Iberian European. That's the majority of the Mexican mixes today in Mexico. Depending on the state, higher European, higher Native American, and some states like in Oaxaca or in Veracruz, more elevated African. But to say he's the first Mexican is just nonsense. He didn't contribute whatsoever in the independence at all to found what is now today modern day Mexico. So to say he's the first Mexican is false. Just another page, another video, blackwashing history.
They don't teach you this in school, but the very first free black town in the Americas was in Mexico. And it was led by an African man, the one Spain couldn't kill, couldn't capture, and eventually had to recognize. Meet Gaspar Yanga. He was from West Africa, likely the Bron people, enslaved and dragged to Veracruz, Mexico in the 1500s, but he didn't stay enslaved long. By 1570, he escaped into the mountains with a group of Africans and built a maroon settlement. And for decades, Spain sent armies to destroy it. And for decades, Yanga's people fought them off. They raided caravans, burned plantations, freed the enslaved, and forced the colonial government to admit they weren't going anywhere. By 1609, Spain launched a massive military campaign to wipe Yanga's community out. But Yanga was strategic. His people knew the mountains better than anyone. They fought Spain's soldiers to a standstill. And here's the part that really flipped the script. Spain surrendered. By 1618, they signed a treaty with Yanga, granting his community independence. The town of San Lorenzo de los Negros, now called Yanga, Veracruz, became the first legally recognized free black settlement in the Americas. Gaspar Yanga proved something that the colonizers never wanted us to know, that enslaved people could win. Not escape for a night, not survive in hiding. Win. Build a free town and force Europe's most powerful empire to negotiate. But of course, his story has been buried, because Yanga's existence exposes the truth. Freedom was never given to us. We took it. Gaspar Yanga, the man who broke Spain's grip in Mexico, before America was even America. They called him a rebel, a bandit, a criminal. History should call him what he was. A founder. And the land that his people fought for still bears his name. Say his name. Gaspar Yanga.
Have you ever heard of an African man who was named a national hero in Mexico? He successfully founded and defended his own colony of free blacks in the country back when it was known as New Spain. Let me tell you about it. I'm the young black mayor, your #1 history influencer. Gaspar Yanga was born May 14, 1545, into a royal family in Gabon, a country on the west coast of Central Africa. He was captured and sold into slavery in New Spain, now Mexico. In 1570, Yanga escaped slavery and founded a free settlement of 500 runaway slaves near Vera Cruz. These blacks were called Maroons. They raided nearby haciendas and plundered travelers along the main road to the capital in order to survive. This disrupted the flow of goods and impacted the New Spain economy. By 1609, Spain became fearful of an uprising which would name a black Maroon as king. So they attacked Yanga's settlement, burning it down. Although the Maroon fighters were armed with mostly only stones and machetes, they could not be defeated. Many were killed in the battles, on both sides. By 1618, the Spanish Empire had to settle on King Yanga's terms. His self-governed district became known as San Lorenzo de los Negros de Cerralvo by 1630. It was one of the first free black towns in the Americas. Yanga was named a national hero of Mexico and the great liberator of America, and the name of his town was changed to Yanga in his honor.
It's come to my attention that a lot of you don't know that the original Mexican was a black man, the original Latino was a black man, the one, the only, Gaspar Yanga. And y'all better put some respect on his name.
Gaspar Yanga is an African, West African slave that was dragged to Mexico, escaped slavery in 1570, liberated his people, and founded the town beside Veracruz called Yanga Town. It has been changed to Lorenzo. Say the truth, bro. Tell the truth, the whole truth. The whole truth. Don't just say things to gaslight black people. Don't do that. The first Mexican was not Gaspar Yanga. It was not. Gaspar Yanga was a West African. West African. Stolen from Africa. A West African. From the Gabon, Angola region. What are you doing? Even his statue says, Negro Africano. See, the fact that you said that and people were cheering for you just proves how easily gaslit black people are. You just gaslight a whole bunch of black people. And they were liking the post, commenting, yeah, that guy is African. West African. From Congo. What are you doing? Don't you even hear the name Yanga? Yanga. Gaspar Yanga. You guys need to do your own research. Not everybody on TikTok has common sense. You, sir, my Afro-Latino guy, respect yourself. Stop misleading people. That was misinformation you just gave people. I know you do it for the views, but stop it. Stop it.
History you probably were not taught at school. Lesson number 1. Who was Gaspar Yanga? Known as the first liberator of the Americas, Gaspar Yanga led one of colonial Mexico's first successful slave uprisings and would go on to establish one of the America's earliest free black settlements. Yanga was said to be of the Yangbara tribe, a member of the royal family of Gabon. He was captured and sold into sugarcane slave work in Veracruz, Mexico. In 1570, he, along with a group of followers, escaped, fled to the mountainous regions near Cordoba, and established a settlement of former slaves, or palenque. They remained there virtually unmolested by Spanish authorities for nearly 40 years. In 1609, Yanga successfully resisted a Spanish attack on the colony. This maroon society continued their raids on Spanish settlements. Finally, in 1618, Yanga achieved a controversial agreement with the colonial government for self-rule of the maroon settlement. It was later called San Lorenzo de los Negros. In the late 1800s, Yanga was named as a national hero of Mexico. In 1932, the settlement he formed, located in today's state of Veracruz, was renamed as Yanga in his honor. Primary source for this information is National Autonomous University of Mexico. For a variety of resources, please be sure to click on the link in the bio. What part of the world do you want to learn about next? Be sure to comment that down below, like, and follow for more content.
So, how much do you guys know about Gaspar Yanga? He is an African warrior prince who was kidnapped, brought to Mexico, and he fought for his freedom. Let's get into it. So, he was born in the early 1500s, and he's believed to be of royal lineage from Gabon or Angola, which was West Central Africa. He was enslaved and brought to New Spain, which is now known as Mexico, by Spanish colonizers. He escaped bondage around 1570, and he led a group of Maroons, escaped enslaved Africans, into the mountains near Veracruz. After escaping into the mountains, he founded a maroon settlement in the highlands and survived independently for decades. His community lived off the land, they resisted repeated Spanish attempts to capture and destroy them, and by the early 1600s, Yenga's group was strong and organized to actually create a treaty with the Spanish. In 1609, the Spanish military launched a campaign to destroy the Maroon colony, but Yanga's people, they held them off. In 1618, Spain finally recognized the settlement's independence and it became the first free black town in the Americas, and it's called San Lorenzo de los Negros. And today, it's just called Yanga in his honor. Yanga is a celebrated symbol in Mexican history, and he's also a symbol of black liberation and resistance. If you'd like to hear more unknown historical figures like this one, give me a follow on IG and you of the Tube under the same username, The Controversial Blonde.
And so before Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad, there was a gentleman in Mexico by the name of Gaspar Yanga. Excuse my pronunciation. He was an African warrior who beat the Spanish and built a free black town in Mexico in the 1500s. They didn't tell us about this one. So let's dive in. So Gaspar Yanga was an African prince taken from what's now Gabon, and enslaved in colonial Mexico. But Yanga didn't stay in chains. Around 1570, he said, enough is enough. Escaped into the mountains and led one of the first major slave rebellions in the Americas. He and his crew, other escaped enslaved Africans, created hidden settlements deep in the mountains near Veracruz. For over 30 years, Yanga's people held it down, raiding Spanish caravans and freeing more enslaved people and defending their land like warriors. Spanish finally tried to wipe them out in 1609, sending an entire army. But Yanga's rebels held strong, and instead of defeat, he negotiated a truce. So in 1618, Spain officially granted freedom and independence to Yanga and his people. They founded a free black town, which still exists today, Yanga, Veracruz. Let that sink in. A self-liberated African man who beat a colonial empire and founded a free town over 200 years before slavery even ended in the U.S. If you're proud of this black Mexican history, tap that heart, tag somebody who needs to hear it, and be sure to share it, man. Let's keep this going. Thank y'all so much for sending me these stories. I'm enjoying them. I'm learning. I apologize if some of the pronunciations and some of those things are wrong, or I may get some of the dates mixed up, but this just gives you a glimpse at what was going on that we don't hear about, right? It would be nice to know. So let's keep it going.
All right. Gaspar Yanga was not African. He was American. Yes, we back at it again. And the theme is the same. You are believers when you're immature. But when you go to the cause, you become a knower. And the problem is that people are believing instead of knowing. Go to the cause, not the effects. The lie has a reference. It's the effect of covering the truth. But the truth can exist without the lie. This man is an American and not an African. How do I know? Because you can't bring any receipts to prove that he came from Africa. But we can bring all the receipts to prove that he was an American. Let's look at his profile. Where did they say he was? Veracruz. You see, you have to go in chronology when you look at the colonizers. Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, French, then English. Most of us start at the end with the English and the British, and we miss all the lies before. Veracruz was not in Mexico at this time. Well, do you have proof? Of course I do. Professor Mode. Vincent Yanez Pinzon. Where was he? January 1500 in the region of the mouth of the what? Amazon. Sighted the mainland of Brazil. And in the name of the King of Portugal, he christened the era Ilha de la Veracruz. Veracruz was in South America. I'm not done. Go back to the name, Yanga. Where does that come from? There we have it. Shout out to Brother Olmec Bookman for showing me this. Yanga. Do I need to go further? This is South America. Gaspar Yanga's name is American. It's not African. Veracruz was not in Mexico even at the time that they are making these statements. It was in South America. So global geography is not what you believe it to be under the British Empire. The switches and changes take scholars to explain it to you. And I'm the top scholar at Aboriginal University. Gaspar Yanga was an American. Maroons are American. Creole is what we do to languages. We call it double, triple entendres, and we do it in hip hop. The historians you have, fire them.
When discussing Afro-Mexican culture and history, we absolutely must bring up Gaspar Yanga, known as the first liberator of the Americas. Gaspar Yanga led one of colonial Mexico's first successful slave uprisings and would go on to establish one of the America's earliest free black settlements. He was captured and sold into slavery in Mexico, and this is where he got his name. What we know as Mexico now was called New Spain during this time, which means that the people that were brought with him were brought by the Spanish to New Spain, or again, what we know as Mexico. The craziest thing is that this happened in 1570. When I think of him, I think of Harriet Tubman here in the US, but her escape only happened in the late 1800s. Yanga was taken to a state in Mexico named Veracruz, and this is where he led a band of slaves to escape to the highlands near Veracruz. There they built a colony of escaped slaves called a palenque, where its isolation helped them protect that colony for over 30 years, meaning that for 30 years they were untouched by the Spanish. And during this time, a lot of other slaves were able to escape to this colony and find refuge. But of course, in the early 1600s, the Spanish decided to come and reclaim what they had stolen, to begin with. Y'all, they sent 550 Spanish troops. Yanga only had about 100 fighters that actually had firearms with them, and about 400 that were armed with stones, machetes, the old-fashioned stuff. They did try to make a negotiation with the Spanish, but of course failed miserably. And so they went to war. Losses were devastating on both sides. Of course, the Spanish got into their settlement and burned it to the ground. But of course, Yanga's people were still able to escape out of the settlement. So technically, the Spanish could not even claim victory. Ha! They knew they couldn't win this one. So in 1618, they finally signed a treaty. And by 1630, the town of San Lorenzo de los Negros, Cerralbo, was established. Again, located in what today is known as the state of Veracruz in southern Mexico. In 1871, 5 decades after Mexican independence, Yanga was designated as a national hero of Mexico. Again, el primer libertador de las Américas. Most people are not aware of the parallels we have with slave history here in the United States and Mexico. The only difference was that our colonizers were from different countries. In the US, we had the British, and in Mexico, we had the Spanish take over. And just like in the US, even though slavery was abolished so long ago, systematic racism lives all throughout our communities. That's why it's so important to educate ourselves on these things.
They called him a rebel, a bandit, a criminal, but what they feared most was that he proved a truth they could never allow to spread, that the enslaved could win. Gaspar Yanga's story begins far away from the sugarcane fields of Veracruz, Mexico. Before the whips, before the chains, before his name was twisted by the tongues of colonizers, he was a prince, a man of royal blood born among the Bantu-speaking people of West Africa, possibly of the brown nation. In his homeland, leadership was not given, it was earned, and Yanga had already been destined to rule before the Portuguese and Spanish ships tore through the West African coast. But when he was captured and shipped to the New World, he refused to let the chains defy him. He watched, he waited, and he planned. By the mean 15th, Spanish colonizers had spread deep into the Americas, from the Caribbean to Mexico, enslaving millions of Africans to build their empire. In Veracruz, enslaved Africans worked the sugarcane plantation under brutal conditions. They were beaten, branded, and broken, or at least that is what the Spanish believed. But they were underestimated something: the fire that comes from royal blood. In 1570, Yanga had escaped. He and a small group of 23 enslaved Africans vanished into the mountains near Veracruz. To the Spanish, they had simply fled. But what Yanga was building was not a hideout, it was a nation. For years, Yanga's Maro settlement, a community of escaped Africans, grew stronger. It became a safe haven for those who refused to live under chains. Runaway Africans, indigenous allies, and even some people of mixed descent joined the settlements. They built farms, defended their borders, and trained in guerrilla warfare. Every time Spain sent soldiers, Yanga's people disappeared into the mountains and then struck back at night. They raided caravans carrying gold and food between Veracruz and Mexico City. They burned plantations, they freed enslaved Africans and brought them back to safety. The Spanish called them bandits, but to the enslaved they were saviors, proof that freedom wasn't a dream but a possibility. For over 3 decades, Yanga's Maros lived free. The Spanish Empire, humiliated that their property had formed an autonomous African city right under their noses, tried everything to destroy them, but every army they sent was defeated. Every ambush failed, every attempt to infiltrate the mountains ended with Spanish soldiers dragged through the jungle by men who once worked their fields. The mountains around Veracruz became known as La Sierra de Yanga. They became the symbol of defiance, a wound in Spain's illusion of control. Now, by 1609, the Spanish crown had had enough. They assembled one of the largest military forces ever sent against a Maro community in the Americas. Hundreds of armed soldiers, mercenaries, and enslaved trackers. Their mission: destroy Yanga and erase his settlements from existence. But Yanga had been preparing for this day for decades. He wasn't just a warrior, he was a strategist. His people knew the terrain better than any map could show. They set traps, used deacons, and launched surprise attacks from the cliffs. The Spanish soldiers, weighed down by armor and arrogancy, were no match for fighters who moved like shadows in the forest. The war dragged on for months, both sides suffered casualties, but the Spanish, expecting an easy victory, found themselves humiliated again. They couldn't defeat younger forces, and worse, every defeat inspired more enslaved Africans across New Spain to escape. The rebellion was spreading like wildfire. Finally, the Spanish commander realized something no colonial officer would ever want to admit. They couldn't win. The empire, with all its guns, horses, and gold, was being held in check by Africans armed with courage, spells, and knowledge of the land. So for the first time in colonial history, Spain did something unthinkable. They negotiated. Yanga demanded terms, not as a slave, not as a rebel, but as a ruler. He wanted official recognition of his community's independence. He wanted freedom for his people. He wanted protection against future slave raids, and he wanted the right to govern his own town under his own laws. Spain resisted at first, but by 1618, after years of failed campaigns and rising costs, the Spanish crown surrendered. They signed a treaty recognizing Youngstown, San Lorenzo de los Negros, later known simply as Yanga, Veracruz, as a free autonomous black settlement. Let that sink in. Decades before the United States even existed, centuries before Haiti's revolution, an African man was enslaved forced the Spanish Empire to recognize his people's freedom. The treaty made Yanga settlements the first legally recognized free black community in the Americas, and it wasn't hidden in the jungle anymore. It became a permanent city with churches, markets, and farms, and it stood as a living reminder that the enslaved could rise, organize, and win. But of course, empires don't forget humiliation. The Spanish chronicles tried to erase Yanga's name from official records. They rewrote history, framing the Maro settlement as a nuisance rather than a revolution. Even centuries later, most school books never mentioned him, because Yanga victory wasn't just military, it was ideological. It exposed the lie that Europeans was destined to rule, that Africans were born to serve, that freedom had to be granted rather than taken. Yanga's story shattered that illusion. He proved that freedom was not something the colonizer could give, it was something Africans could take and defend. Now think about what that meant for colonial powers. If one African prince could build an independent city in the heart of Spanish Mexico, how many more could rise? How many more plantations could fall? How many more rebellions could succeed? That is why they buried his name, because Yanga represented possibility, revolution, and the uncomfortable truth that oppressed were never powerless. Today, the town of Yanga still exists in Veracruz, Mexico. Its people still bear the echoes of that legacy. Afro-Mexicans who descended from the Maros Yangali, every year they celebrated his memory with paradise, festivals, and rituals that blend Africa and indigenous traditions. They call him El Primer Liberator de las Americans, the first liberator of the Americans. But even now, his name is unknown to many in the diaspora because he were taught about colonizers, Columbus, Cortes, Pizarro, but not about the Africans who resisted them. We were taught that liberation began with Abraham Lincoln or Bolivar, but Yanga's victory came centuries before any of them. Imagine what it meant in the 15th for an African prince enslaved and shipped across the ocean to rise up and force one of the world's most powerful empires to bow. That is not just rebellion, that is statecraft, that is genius. And Yanga wasn't alone. Across the Americas, from the mountains of Jamaica to the forests of Brazil, other Maro leaders were waging similar wars. In Jamaica, the Maros, led by Queen Anna, built independent settlements that survived British attacks. In Brazil, Quilombo dos Palmares became a vast Maro kingdom that lasted nearly a century, but Yanga was the first to make the colonizer sign a treaty. He took the rebellion out of the jungle and turned it into recognized sovereignty. He transformed resistance into governance, and that is what makes him one of the greatest leaders in African diasporic history. But history, especially colonial history, doesn't like black victories. It glorifies martyrdom, not triumph. It loves to tell stories of noble suffering, not strategic conquests. So Yanga became a ghost in textbooks, whispered only in local folk lore or mentioned briefly in Afro-Mexican communities. Even Mexican national history, which celebrates revolutionaries like Hidalgo and Zapata, rarely gives Yanga the space he deserves. Yet, without him, the idea of liberation on America's soil might have never taken root. Because Yanga proved something revolutionary, freedom wasn't European, it was Africa. When you trace the root of resistance from the Haitian Revolution to the Civil Rights Movement, from Pan-Africanism to modern liberation struggles, the seed was already planted in the mountains of Veracruz, and that seed had the name Gaspar Yanga. He taught that leadership isn't given by crowns or empires, it's earned by sacrifice and vision. He showed that revolution isn't born from hatred, but from dignity. And he demonstrated that freedom doesn't wait for permission. Even now, centuries later, his lesson remains relevant because the same system that tried to silence him still exists. In different forms, the world still tries to erase stories that don't fit the colonial narrative, but the truth has a way of resurfacing. And today, Yanga's name is being spoken again, not as a myth, but as a man who changed history. He wasn't just escaping slavery, he was founding a nation. He wasn't just running from oppressor, he was running towards sovereignty. And when Spain finally signed that treaty, it wasn't messy, it was surrender. Gaspar Yanga proved that the power doesn't come from skin color or any armies or gold. It comes from conviction, from the belief that freedom is non-negotiable. Centuries before wars like independence or liberation became fashionable, Yanga lived them. He stood on land stolen by conquerors and said no more. And that defiance still echoes in every protest, every offspring or rising, every demand for justice by people of African descent around the world. When you say Yanga's name, you are not just remembering a man, you are invoking a legacy. The legacy of self-liberation, the legacy of those who refused to die quietly. He was called a rebel by the Spanish, but to his people he was a founder, the first African ruler of free black land in Americas. And the soil he fought for still carries his name. Gaspar Yanga, the African who defeated Spain, the man who turned rebellion into freedom, the founder of a nation before the world even knew what freedom meant.
And if you have watched up to this extent, thank you so much for all the love and support. Don't forget to please leave me your own thought in the comment section of what you think of this video. And please do not forget that we do not support any form of bullying and harassment. Alright, lovely. See you when I upload the next video.